Welcome to Semper Fi. I'm your host, Mark Bonstein, or as I was commonly referred to, Staff Sergeant B. We'll get to my host in 1 minute. Today, March 31st, Thursday, but we'll do our what happened this day in military history. Excuse me. In the Marines in 1801, Lieutenant Colonel Commandant William W. Burroughs rode with the President, Thomas Jefferson, to look for a proper place to fix the Marine barracks on. And joint effort by the Navy and the Air Force in 1945, U.S. forces, including Task Force 58, TF-52, continued airstrikes on Okinawa while TF-54 continued bombing the island. And in the Army in 1951, Operation Ripper was officially terminated as 8th Army fought its way back to the 38th parallel. All right, today's guest came in 1954, retired Air Force, Tech Sergeant, which is an E6, and made comment early before the show that you were up for the Bronze Star. So, welcome my guest, Philip Kiefer. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
All
Pleasure
right.
to be here today.
Thank you. Give us a little down where you went to boot camp, and you didn't come in. Well, you weren't drafted, were you? 54?
No, I wasn't drafted. Well, actually, my military career began. I joined the Army Reserves or National Guard in Pennsylvania before I graduated from high school.
Okay.
Because Vietnam, and it was just winding down. Vietnam was, and I couldn't find work in Pennsylvania, so I moved on. Went to Ohio. I was transferred into the Army National Guard, or Army Reserves in Ohio, and then 19th of November 1954, I enlisted in the United States Air Force, and did my service to the country.
All right, where'd you go to boot camp?
I went to boot camp. They gave me an option. I could go in right away and go to Sampson Air Force Base in New York. This is in November. It's cold in Cleveland. I knew that wouldn't be much of a choice. They said you could wait a couple weeks and then we'll send you down to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. So I went to San Antonio, Texas. Wasn't much of a choice to make.
How was training back then in 54?
Well, you know. How was training back then?
Yeah.
I think that the training was very, very good. I had no familiarity at all with the military, but it was an eye-opening thing to go through basic training. Yes, people complained about the treatment that you got in basic training, and it was humiliating, probably, yes, in some respects, but they took very good care of us. They made sure that we were always well fed. We had all of our inoculations. It was the best treatment you could ask for.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
why I made the military my career.
And you did how many years?
I did 20 years and a few days active duty, plus the 5 months and so many days in the National Guard and the Army Reserves.
Okay. So upon graduation, what was your MOS?
32170E, which is a bombing navigational equipment technician. Bombing navigation would be, we worked on B-47 bombers. We worked on we had mechanical computers, which were enormous, very heavy things. We had an optical system. We actually had a periscope on an airplane. And we had what they called the horizontal periscope, but they used prisms and lenses to deflect it downward so that they could actually use it to bomb optically if we had cloud cover and the radar target was obscured.
Jeez.
So we did that, and I did that. I was stationed at Hunter Air Force Base in Savannah, Georgia, which was nice. Then they sent me to Plattsburgh, New York. I worked up there until I moved on and went into the missile systems. From bomb nav, I went into the Mace missile program. I went through school at Lowry Air Force Base again, and went down to Florida, Orlando Air Force Base, got combat crew training on missiles, the Mace missile, then got sent to Germany until that system was phased out. I came back, was sent to Wurtsmith, Michigan, into the Hound Dog missile program. They awarded me my 7 level, which is highest skill level, well, E9. Yeah. 7 level was the highest, and then you get 9 level to make E9 later on. They came out with E9, with the 9 level. But they awarded me the 7 level, and it made me overnight supervisor with a bunch of people that were just running around. I had no idea what the heck they were doing. I transferred out. Then I went into precision measurements equipment laboratories, where we calibrated and repaired test equipment for maintaining all kinds of electronics equipment, electrical equipment, mechanical measuring devices. Actually, the field was called metrology, which is a study of measuring devices. And I worked in that field until I retired from the Air Force. I went from the technical school there. They sent me to Plattsburgh, New York, which was a terrible place. From there, then I was sent to Vietnam. I did a year. Then I volunteered for another 90 days in Vietnam. I tried to extend again, but the war was winding down, so they made me come back, and I spent my last 2 years at Nellis Air Force Base here in Nevada, right outside Las Vegas.
In the beginning, you said when you went through your first school and your bomb classes that you went through.
Bombing navigational.
What was the plane that you flew on the most?
Well, at that time, I started training on a B-36.
Okay.
And before I could get very far along into the schedule, they had decided that they were phasing out the B-36s. So they transferred me over into bombing navigational systems on B-47. Equipment was the same except the position of the periscope again.
That was the only modification?
Well, the only real difference, I mean, electronically, mechanically, and all, the radar was the same, all the old mechanical computers were the same, except the B-47 used what they called the horizontal periscope, and the B-36 used the vertical periscope, which just went the opposite direction from a periscope on a submarine.
Go figure.
But it was used, and you could use them. We used them in some of the alignments. We had to make sure that they were absolutely working perfectly. In case something happened, if the navigator lost his radar,
right,
he could bomb optically. And it was a good option. But a lot of times some of the navigators couldn't detect a target on the radar, and they'd cheat and they'd use the optics. So they finally did away with those systems. But it was a good system. It was a good backup system. It was actually totally independent from the rest of it. You could do it all mechanically.
Okay. Now, you made a comment before the show that you said you were put up for the Bronze Star, and you were kind of cheated out of that.
Well, yes. The reason that I was qualified for the Bronze Star, I was in Vietnam, and I had special orders. The orders just stated that time of departure open, time of return open, means of transportation any. And then as an enlisted man, I could bump any officer up to a full colonel if I needed the seat to get to my destination.
Okay.
And my boss at the time was supposed to go up to this base called, what's the name of it? I'll remember it in a minute. But anyways, we had to drive from Saigon up through, we went by LBJ, Long Binh Jail. LBJ didn't like that. It was called Long Binh, but we called it LBJ. And Lyndon B. Johnson did not like that, President Johnson, for obvious reasons. And Benoit was the name of the base. Okay. And I got up to Benoit, and I stopped at the gate, and the guard asked me, he looked at my orders and all and said, "Sergeant Kiefer, where did you come from?" So we drove up from Saigon, and he said, "You drove up from Saigon?" I said, "Well, yeah." He says, "There's no way you could have driven up from Saigon." He said, "The Viet Cong and the South Vietnamese have been fighting, and the Viet Cong have interdicted the road and they control the highway. There's no way you could have come through there. Well, I thought, I was going through the most vivid training exercise I had ever seen in my life. Things were exploding. There were small rounds going overhead. Bodies were laying around, but if you've seen real training exercises, they look real.
Right.
At no time did I have any thought that I was going through a combat zone. And when I found out, well, finally, the guy says, well, I can't let you go on the base because I can't believe you drove up from Saigon. I says, well, fine. I'll just turn around and I'll drive right back. And he says, I can't let you do that either, sir. I says, well, I think I need to speak to the officer of the day. And he came out. I explained the situation to him about what happened. I said, whatever you do. The young man is very young. It's his first overseas assignment. He's just a two-striper. Mm-hmm. I says, whatever you do, don't punish him. He was doing his job and he's doing it well. Matter of fact, give him a commendation. I says, but he says, what's the situation? And I told him, and he says, okay. He says, let me make a phone call. He made a phone call. He says, okay, proceed on and do your work. When you come back, we'll check. He says, right now, the highway is free again. You can go back. So we came back and we drove back down, and there was nothing that went on, but it didn't sink in immediately what I just experienced.
Jeez.
I thought, good Lord Almighty, you know. And we were there. The guy that was with me, his name was George C. Blood. He was driving. We had a Chevy Carryall, Air Force markings on it, which was a piece of crap. Well, we ran into a building before we left, and they worked on the brakes, and we drove up to Benoit, and we ran into the calibration lab building. No brakes again. But anyways, we went ahead and we got our duties taken care of, and we drove back down. Thank God we didn't have any more brake problems because we had to drive right through the streets of Saigon. Nothing but bicycles and hop tacks and people on foot and taxi cabs and military vehicles, and it was quite a trip. It was a real trip.
I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to hear the rest of your story about this while you didn't get your Bronze Star. We're going to take a quick commercial break. So get a cup of coffee and join us so Philip can tell the rest of his story. Be right back. All right, welcome back. We're talking with my guest, retired Tech Sergeant Philip Kiefer, and he was just going through a story on how he was not given his just deserves on a Bronze Star. So we're going to go back and have you finish your story.
Okay. Yeah, I thought about this later because, you know, awards and medals mean a lot towards promotion. It counts points towards promotion. And I knew that I was eligible for it, and I went to the fellow, not the fellow that sent me on this job, but the guy that replaced him. And I said, you know, I'm eligible for the Bronze Star if you go ahead and put in a request for it. And he said, no, he says, I won't do that. He says, why don't you just go ahead and write it up and give it to me, and I'll sign it, and we'll submit it. And I says, if that's all you think of me, you can take your Bronze Star and put it where the sun doesn't shine.
It's amazing how they'll tell you you can have it provided you write up your own citation.
No,
that's
to me,
that's not their job.
No, nope, not my military.
Oh, your superiors deem you worthy of it. They're supposed to write it up.
Yes, he should have. But well, I don't want to tell any stories about him while we were being rocketed and all, so it's not immaterial.
Was it ever downgraded to anything else, or was it just completely?
It was just dropped.
It was just dropped.
I refused to submit it.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Any other fun stories you had while you were either in country or one of your other duty stations?
In country? Well, a couple times ran into situations where it could have been really bad. One time we were going out to, the French had been there long before we had ever gotten there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So they had, there was a big plantation, a rubber plantation, and that's what really we got involved in the beginning of Vietnam, because the French were there, they fought with the Vietnamese, the French lost.
Right.
Okay, and it was all about the rubber plantations. So the place was called Plantation Road, and they had some really, really neat bars out on Plantation Road, and there were a lot of young ladies in attendance. And of course, we like to go out there, and I hired this thing, and it was called a cyclo. Strangest looking thing you'd ever see in your life. It was actually on a motorcycle frame, except they had the driver sat behind this thing, and it looked like a front end scoop, but you sat in.
Okay.
And he sat behind you. He had the driving wheels, and then he had front wheels, and they were steerable. And we started going out to this bar. I can't remember the name of it. But all of a sudden, he made a quick right turn and headed down an alley. And I looked down, and there were 5 guys were lined up the direction we were headed, and they had the whole street blocked off, and they were armed with AK-47s. I thought, boy, this is not good. And I had a friend, and he had provided me with a thing, we called them slap flares. They were about the diameter of a good-sized ballpoint pen. And you could put there's Willie Peter, white phosphorus, but you had, they were for flares. You had the red, you had green, and then you had just a white flare. And you'd use that to signal your position if you got down, because it was on your parachute harness.
Okay.
And but I had one, and I carried it for personal protection, because we were off base. We were not allowed to have any weapons at all. And we're down there with the people. We're in full uniform. And when I saw this situation, this guy was with me. His first name was Bud. I said, Bud, we're in trouble. And I turned around, and I got on my knees, and I grabbed this cyclo driver by the back of the head, and I pulled this thing back. And you let go, it's spring-loaded.
Right.
I mean, if he hurt me or kill me, it would go off. And it's right at his throat. And I said, you either turn it around or I'm going to let it fly. And believe it or not, that gentleman took me to the bar that I wanted to go to in the first place, and he didn't even charge me for the ride.
Well, he had to go clean himself up after you did that.
Well, I would think so,
Yeah.
because he knew what it was. It was a death sentence. But I knew if we continued down there, it was my death sentence. They weren't down there to do a waltz with me or hug and kiss me.
He'd give you a 21-gun salute.
No, they were there to rob us and kill us. We knew that. So I thought that was an exciting little trip.
Jeez, that's fun.
And it was just one of the few.
That was interesting. It's a good thing you had that little device on you. And it was the other smart thing is that you guys traveled in pair.
Yeah.
Had to have been just by yourself.
No. You never traveled alone.
That's the way it was when I was in the Philippines. They always insisted.
Make sure you had a buddy, and you made sure that you knew who your friend was, and you knew you could trust him, especially if things got bad.
Yeah, they always pressed the buddy system. Even when I was in Camp Lejeune, if you went out, go out with a few guys.
And you took care of each other. No matter what happened, you were together, you were a unit.
The first time I got stationed in Camp Lejeune, I was there that night, and the guys came up to me in the barracks, and they said, "You want to go out with us?" And I said, "Yeah." So they turned around and they said, "You got to go to the PX and buy a K-bar." And I didn't understand why. And the one guy says, "Come on, I'll take you. I'll show you where the PX is." I went and bought a K-bar, still not really understanding the concept. And we came back, and I had my K-bar, and the one guy stands there looking at me saying, "All right, we'll strap it on." And there was about 9 of us, and everybody was carrying their K-bars.
Of course.
And, you know, so we used to tuck our shirts in our trousers so it wasn't a concealed weapon. So I put the K-bar on, still not really fully understanding, why are we doing this? So we head out to the crossroads out in, I can't think of the name, in North Carolina. It was out like where I guess where you were at. All the strip clubs are up and down. And we'd go into the bars back in '78, and everybody had a K-bar on. And when somebody at the bar stood up and says, "Hey, I got to run to the head," the senior guy would sit there and say, "All right, you go with him." And everybody, we doubled up, and when one person went to the head, if somebody else says, "You know what, I got to go too, I'll go with you," everybody was together.
Oh, yeah.
And I found out because it was just the show and strength of having all them fighting knives on our sides.
Well, it's not just show of strength. That, again, though, you feel secure because you know you're not there alone.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the whole thing is of it. No man left alone.
Yep, no one left behind.
Nope.
And like I said, it was after that concept, I felt like, you know, this is all right. Every time these guys go out, you know, safety in numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And like I said, there was 9 of us, and
now that's
bar to bar.
Basically the same thing that I did. And later on, it carried on into my time after military life. I went through the same situations with foreign countries I was in. I worked as a, like I said, government contractor for 31 plus years. And it was a great life, but we never ever forgot about the military. When I was in working for OMC in Sudan, the fellow that was in charge was a full colonel, and he was a man that came up through the ranks.
I have more respect for Mustangers.
Oh yeah, he was a Mustang, and he'd come all the way up through the ranks, and he was Army, U.S. Army, and I'll tell you what, he told it exactly the way it was. And he was quite an embarrassment to his secretary a lot of times. Because he was used to the old school, and when we talked a little bit rougher then.
Yeah.
And
didn't have to be so politically correct.
No, and he was a qualified pilot. He flew the embassy aircraft because I was stationed, I worked in, out of Port Sudan. Mm-hmm. And down in, then we worked down in Khartoum in the capital, and the embassy was in Khartoum. And the only way we had a 2-way radios, and the only way we could even carry on with the outside world because there were no telephone lines in there or anything. Everything, they didn't pay their bills, so there was no service.
Things just got
total isolation. Yeah. Total isolation. You know, and it was Colonel Bob Peck. Yeah, I'll never forget him. He was quite a guy.
I was just talking to somebody the other day how I had more respect for people that were enlisted and then went to OCS and then became officers. One of my favorite officers I ever served under, his name was, he retired a major, was Captain Mike Hester. Mm-hmm. And he was on the, back in the 60s, he was on the Marine Corps Silent Drill Team. And he was a sergeant when he finally got commissioned as warrant officer. And then during Desert Shield, he went over there as a captain, came back a major, and I heard he picked up a Bronze Star over there. I seen him once when he retired, and I was on my way to the ATM, and we talked. But at that time, I didn't know he picked up the Bronze Star. Yeah. And he wound up moving out to, leaving California, going to Kentucky or somewhere, getting an like a vice president job at some factory. So he was real good people. Yeah. And he had he got the gold or Bronze Star for taking the AK-47 in the calf back in Vietnam when he pulled out one of his guys from an LP. Yeah. And he never talked about it until one run. Yeah. And then we heard about it.
Yeah. Well, my family, we can trace our military history all the way back to, one guy was a sergeant in the Revolutionary War.
Really?
Yeah. And we fought in every war there was. I think on both sides in the Civil War. I'm not too sure. But my great-grandfather is buried in Arlington. And I was the first member of our family to ever go on and retire from the military. And after that, I had a nephew on my sister's side. He enlisted in the Air Force and decided he liked the military, but he wanted to be an officer. He got out, got his college degree, and went back and retired as an Air Force captain.
There you go.
And then the other one, another nephew on my brother's side, he ended up with he had admission to West Point or Annapolis, and he went to Annapolis, and he retired as a naval captain.
Not bad.
So
That's real
we
good.
have a very good military background.
Yeah, your family tree really goes back.
Yeah.
We're coming down to about 2 minutes left on the show, and I noticed you brought a couple things in. So why don't you? I don't want to
just
end the show without you being
Sure.
able to show these.
Well, these are just a couple caps that I brought in. Of course, this is my retired Air Force hat. Here we go.
Yeah, that's that camera over
Yeah.
there. There you go.
There we go. And then this one, of course, is Vietnam. And this, again, is another United States Air Force. Very proud of my military service.
As should be.
And we all contributed a lot. And we all have a lot to be proud of, both myself and you. And it was a pleasure talking to you.
And for being on the show, I'd like to give you a Semper Fi chip. We're coming down to our last minute, so I'd like you to have that for being a guest on the show.
Well, I appreciate this very much.
All right.
This will go on to somebody in my family. I don't know who just yet, because I'm trying to gather up things. I'll be 75 in May,
Okay.
and I'm doing pretty good for my age.
Yeah, you're doing real good. I like the handlebar going on.
Yeah, well.
All right. Well, we're coming down to another episode of Semper Fi. I want to thank my guests for being on the show. And remember, with an estimated over 5,000 veterans in Nye County, you have a story. I want to hear it, and I want to share it, just like Philip did. My number is 513-2056. So till next week, you have a good week, and hoorah, Semper Fi. And thank you for being